Okay, so a bit of an intro. Buyers Remorse is a project initiated by Zipporah, Blake-Gravesande and Carmen Okome. It is formed in response to Zipporah and Carmen's own experiences of structural racism while studying fine art and history of art at the University of Leeds. And the project extends a lineage of initiatives organised by students of colour in the school previously. There are many strands to the project, including workshops, resources, talks, and a complaints desk. So inspired by the Guerrilla Girls 2016 Complaints Desk project, Zipporah and Carmen's idea was to create a platform for the school where students and staff can anonymously file a complaint relating to experiences or observations of structural racism. These complaints are then displayed on the Buyers Remorse website, creating a kind of archive of moments which intend to encourage change in the school at a personal and a structural level. The complaints desk for University of Leeds staff and students is still open. And of course, the information is available on the website also for anyone that's not part of the University of Leeds. As part of our previous talks that some of you might have come along to, so with Zarina Mohammed, with Griselda Pollock and Sam Allen from Museum Detox, and those talks are now online and available to watch on the Buyers Remorse YouTube channel. I shared a quote from Sarah Ahmed in relation to their concept of complaint collective. And Sarah Ahmed's book Complaint will be published by Duke Press in October. I'm really excited. Ahmed articulates the gesture of complaint in their research as one of refusal. So complaint as refusal, also as a kind of feminist pedagogy, a process of change and a process of growth. In their research, Ahmed calls for a complaint collective, defining that as a way of coming together and being there for each other, with each other, because of what we've been through. Following the long lineage of Black feminist and feminist of colour critiques of the university, galvanized by Ahmed's research and by our previous contributions from Zarina, Griselda, and Sam, we as Buyers Remorse continue to refuse. And we are shifting the idea of refusal in relation to the visual arts practices for our talk this evening with our contribution from artist Akeelah Bertram. So to introduce Akeelah, who we're really, really excited to have with us today. Akeelah is a cross-disciplinary artist who uses digital art to explore complex cultural narratives, focusing on those cultures formed as a result of colonialism. Akeelah will be presenting or talking about a selection of their artwork, and then we'll be in conversation with the Buyers Remorse team, Zipporah and Carmen, chatting out the potential of artistic practices to decolonize our relationships with locations and cultures. So just before I spotlight Akeelah, Carmen and Zipporah, just wanted to say we're going to do questions in the second half of the event. So if you don't mind taking a note of any questions and saving them up until then. Okay, and I'll hand over. I feel like I just spoke very, very fast. Apologies if I did. Let me spotlight use. Okay, fab. All right, that's me. Have fun.
Nice. Yeah, so I'm Carmen, just as to put names to faces. I'm Carmen and
I'm Zipporah.
And we're the brain of Buyers Remorse, quote unquote. And so thank you so much, Akeelah, for giving us your time and for responding to our thousands of emails throughout over the last year when it came to setting up this event. But so we had a bunch of reasons we want to bring you, but I bring you into Buyers Remorse and bring you into the Complaints Collective. But I think what we really wanted to kind of bring forward more than anything was Akeelah was one of the first artists of color I met at as a student and studying fine art at University of Leeds, and she was one of the people who came in and introduced this whole new perspective on art to me, and I know to quite a few of my peers as well. And also, well, I'll let Akeelah do her own bio to jump in. But I thought with her practice, it would be really interesting to think about what decoloniality looks like as an artist and as people who act as creators in the space. And I might have just completely added to what Nicola said or restated it, but we're just going to go with that. Yeah, Akeelah, do you want to do your own introduction, or do you want to just jump straight in?
Yeah, I'll just say a few words, because I think some of the questions we'll cover later I don't want to double up on anything that we might talk about afterwards. But yeah, as Carmen and Nicola have mentioned, I am an artist. I live and work in Leeds. I did my BA at Leeds University, and then I also studied at the Royal College of Art. And I'm really grateful to be here and hopefully going to have some insightful conversation. I'll preface this evening by saying I'm going to be speaking from a very personal point of view. There is no real conceptual or theoretical grounding with what I'll say tonight. It's more about the things I've experienced and the insights that I've gained as a result of those experiences. So it is going to be quite, not to be narcissistic, but it's going to be quite based around what I've seen, heard, and done. So yeah, and I think I'll leave it there, because I think we'll cover other stuff throughout the talk.
Yeah, perfect. So I'll jump in with the kind of first question. I always find this really fascinating as artists, especially artists of color. So what do you call yourself as an artist in terms of, like, do you go with Black British, a Yorkshire artist, a Northern artist, or something entirely more whimsical than the standard labels that we get given?
Yes, I think this is a really interesting question, mainly because labels depend on your audience. Like, the label you'll assign to yourself depends on who's asking, what kind of perceptions or preconceptions they might already have, and that'll cause you to shift which label you use. So of course, like, I'm all of those things. I'm a Yorkshire artist, I'm a Black artist, Black British artist, British Jamaican artist, African Caribbean artist, like second generation or first generation, depending on how you want to define it. And it really, I don't cling to anyone in particular. It definitely depends on who's listening or who's asking, and what is it that they're actually, like, asking to know about me. I think it's interesting if you say Black British, because a lot of the few representations that make it into the mainstream are very southern focused. They're very London centric. And I think it's even interesting in circles with other Black people or people of colour, it can still be quite novelty to be from Yorkshire or from the north, and also be a person of colour, and also be working in the creative industries. So to round off that question, it just depends on who's asking what I call myself. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely get that. I feel like as well, because, like, me and Zipporah are both from London, so like we're again with the Southerners coming in and being like, oh.
Invading the north.
Yeah, I mean, guilty. Like,
there was no shade in that. Like,
nah, it's cheaper. That's why we're coming. but like, yeah, it is like the Black British is kind of rhetoric of the art world is very much like, it's very like John Comfort, like even Black Audio Collective, they're all mainly London based groups, which might be, I think it's just because London's big and there's like a lot of people, and that's probably why there's so many like and people of color. But like it's been a surprise to me, like studying at Leeds, it's there you don't get a lot of northern people of color meeting you and being like, oh no, this is my space as well. It tends to be the Southerners who are stuck around. Like, that's kind of the vibe you get.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because it depends. Like, there are hierarchies within creative industries, and whether you choose to respect those hierarchies or not is a different story altogether. But coming through kind of more an academic route into creative industries, like locally in Leeds, there's a lot of like creatives of colours, but they may be more the self-taught, or they may be more in music or dance or some, not necessarily the fine art field. And so if you're rolling in the fine arts circles or like the more academic circles, then you may have less representation there. And sometimes like those circles with less representation can be more hostile, and so people just avoid them. And it's sometimes it's just really basic rationalizing that leads to that.
Yeah. And also I feel like there's not a lot of people of color in fine art in general. Like, there's not a lot of us running about doing, and I feel like we're all a bit novelty. Like it was mentioned in like our previous talk that like not many POC families are like, that is the right decision to make. When you come at them with like BA fine art, they're like, no.
I was strongly advised to do economics, and when I say strongly advised by like Jamaican parents, it was like, you're not doing art, you're doing economics. And it was I took a year off because I was like, well, I don't want to do that. And and it was slow realization to get here. And I mean, my parents are very encouraging were very encouraging and adamant that me and my siblings would go as far as we possibly could with our education in whatever field, but they were also very conscious that they'd come to this country for an economic advantage, and the industries that they wanted us to go into would be industries that would give us more access to resources, different type of life than that they'd had. And so you say fine art, how are you going to make money is the first question. And also, what is that? Like, I didn't know any Black fine artists. They weren't in my family. We had creativity and we had creative expression in abundance, but again, it wasn't in the realm of academia, fine art world. It was in more community and cultural settings. So
yeah, I definitely see that. I relate to it a lot because like, I also have Jamaican/Caribbean parents. But I was very lucky because my mum was very into the arts. So when I was just like, oh, I want to do like humanities adjacent, whatever stuff, like art stuff, she was just like, yeah, sure. But I know a lot of people don't have that at all.
And I think the flip side of that is like, I know we're going to talk about this, but I remember my first day at Leeds University, my dad dropped me off, and when he came to England, he'd grown up in Hyde Park, so it's his locality, his local area. And he told me that when he used to go to school on the bus, he'd drive past the Parkinson steps, and because of the institutional racism at the time, he was very aware that that wasn't a place he would ever be able to get to. And when he dropped me off, he was quite emotional, and he was like, I never thought that I'd be able to go somewhere like this, and now you're going here. I just want you to do your best, all that kind of stuff. And also from my own, going to majority white schools in the north of England, me being there, it wasn't a familiar space, and I did find it difficult. And I remember the first social event that they had, which was like meet the tutors, meet the faculty, students meet the faculty. And I didn't attend, I went, but I didn't attend because when I looked in, I thought, I don't really belong here. And I felt embarrassed, and I didn't know how to navigate it, and I just left. And, it can be quite an uphill struggle to enter that world.
Yeah, it's like a lot of just it's so weird because we have experience of being children of immigrants who have that struggle with education and just being very proud of you making that, but when you get to that space, it's not welcoming at all. But that takes us very smoothly onto our next point. Sorry, Carmen.
Yeah.
So you're a Leeds Fine Art alumni. How was your time in Leeds as a Black student?
I think it was very interesting, and it was definitely about having your foot in different worlds at the same time. So I took part in the ACS, the African Caribbean Society, which was very interesting because a lot of the students, again, I was the only fine artist. A lot of the other students were studying law or engineering or finance, something like that. But it was great because you're talking and meeting with people from all over the world, from the Caribbean, from different African countries. And with me being from Leeds and knowing Leeds and living in Leeds and being used to Leeds, I mean, I remember we went on a night out and we were racially profiled, and my friend, who you know, her mum's an ambassador, was like, what the hell is this? What? And I was like, this is just normal, just, you know, this is it for us. I'm used to this. But, you know, so you had lots of different types of Black experiences in that setting. Then I had my fine art course, and I think I really shrank away from anything to do with my culture, mostly because of the pigeonholing that can occur when you show up as a Black artist and it's like, well, I expect you to make things about Black stuff. And you're like, oh, I just like abstract colors and stuff, you know? And so I think and you're a teenager, and like anybody that's at university, you're figuring out who you are. You're going through quite a fast period of transformation. So as a Black student in fine art, I was very aware and very apprehensive about what I chose to explore through my work, because I was worried about any particular perceptions, and I couldn't tell what people were thinking. And some of that is not necessarily about Leeds, and more so about being a person of color in a majority white country. And you have all these other, like, double consciousness. Zipporah talks about, you have double, triple, quadruple consciousness, and you're thinking about all the different ways people can see you, and it's just a lot of energy consumption, I suppose.
Yeah, I definitely get that. I feel like I think it's such like a weird type of like a cultural clash in a way of just like you're coming at especially such a vulnerable time, and it's just like being like one of like the only like Black students that it would be very hard to like, I don't know, find your own authenticity as an artist, and other people are just trying to make you into like, it could be like putting you into a box before you actually know who you are, basically. But yeah, it's like very complex.
Yeah, it's difficult, and I think it's very difficult when you're just trying to communicate experiences that are just very normal and everyday to you. But in the art world, Blackness is massively politicized. So I remember being at the RCA and having a discussion / argument that went absolutely nowhere, because I'd used majority Black figures in a video work, and I was told that my work was inherently political, but nobody was able to tell me what were the politics of the work, what was the message, what was the ideology being portrayed, aside from the fact that everybody in it was Black. And, you know, the fact that everybody in another video work was white immediately wasn't political and could be about anything. And I think it was just lacking the language at that time to articulate why that didn't make sense to me, and why, from my perspective, politics wasn't involved. It was just a work about emotion. But it couldn't just be about emotion, because as soon as you're Black, there's a whole other politics that is brought into it within art frameworks and ideologies and ways of theorizing. And that's quite difficult, especially if you didn't grow up familiar with those theories, and, you know, you experience the real world implications of those theories, but you don't necessarily learn them and in a way that you can argue them and articulate them or critique them.
Yeah, I feel like that's I think that's like a painful awareness that I've heard about, not just from myself and like from you, but like other peers, my peers, of realizing that you know, in any way visualizing, or the Black body itself is inherently political within a white space. And there's that visual politics you have to straddle the line of. And it's really, it does make you want to shy away from representing the Black body, because sometimes you just want to make work that's not in any way like quote unquote political, and sometimes and I think that's the right that every artist should be granted within their own realm of work. And yeah, it's also something that I feel like I've acknowledged in my own practice, in my own way. Like, I was in a tutorial and I was doing a sound work, and the person in the sound work happened to mention Nigeria. And for me, I was like, oh great, this is now about race. Like, but in reality, it had nothing to do about race. I mentioned that the person mentioned they're a country. And because of that, it was like all the politics surrounding all of this, or just the even insinuation of that person being a person of color completely changes the work in some people's mind. And I was so hypersensitive to that. But it which I'm speaking.
Oh dear. Nicola, can you hear Carmen? Because I can't.
I can't actually, no. Or maybe, oh, Carmen and Zipporah, are you back? Can you say something so we can tell if you're back?
Can you not hear?
Oh. So don't you just love Zoom?
Oh no!
Are we here? Oh.
Yeah, I think you're.
We haven't, no, we can't, we've still got you on a freeze frame. Oh, we think you're back. Yeah.
Are we back?
You're
Okay.
back.
Yeah.
Okay.
The joys of Zoom.
So our internet was unstable, guys.
For a little bit, so
sorry.
we apologize. But basically, along the lines of you know, audience and like how Black bodies are seen and visual policies of that, I wanted to ask, who are you making your work for, and what does this represent for you, kind of, Akeelah, within your own practice?
Mm-hmm.
Who's your audience?
I would say my first audience is myself. Just in the sense that I explore things I'm interested in, and over the years, something that I've learned and built into my practice is relying on my gut feeling, relying on my intuition, relying on how letting my emotions about a piece, a material, a line of inquiry really lead the charge in whether I explore it or not. And then I would say the second audience, and this may be more personal because I come from a family with, I would say this is quite common in different Caribbean cultures, specifically Jamaican culture, to be very forthcoming with your opinion. Read, critique, read, I don't like what you're doing, what is that? That doesn't make sense. And so like that soundtrack is always in the back of my mind, and making it for my mum almost, like, you know, because I know she'll come in and she'll be like, interesting. Like,
I relate almost too heavily to that.
Yeah, so maybe that's something I need to go to a counselor about. I don't know. But yeah, I would say that's my primary audiences, and whilst the work can be complex, and it can play on different traditions and canon from like an art historical point of view, it's really about how do people feel when they get there, and I'm interested in how a range of people will feel when they get there. So I need to be thinking about people who are not like me, who are very different to me, but also who walk through the world like me. And I judge the success of my work on that range and that spectrum of people being able to come in and take something from it and enjoy it, or hate it, or have some kind of strong reaction to it. And so that doesn't really give you a very specific audience of who I'm thinking of, but that's the kind of hierarchy of needs that I'm going through when I'm making work. Me, my mum, literally everybody on the planet.
So like, as a daughter, it's like your mum will always appreciate that that's the person you're trying to impress. Just like, mum, this is for you, all of me. I feel like she appreciates that a lot.
Yeah, like you see, fine art is good. Like it can be good. It was a good idea.
Yeah, just continuously backing yourself up. You got something to prove every time.
Just being like, oh, I'm not too sure about this art thing over here.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't have a Caribbean family. I still deal with that from my Nigerian family. It's like you do want them to like, because I mean, I think as well, like that I identify with this as well. But I've also always thought that like, because I'm making work with them, like a lot of the time I'm making work from them or with them. So I kind of want them to care or like to feel like it's almost like you share ownership a little bit with them if you're like making work from like your culture or your third culture, your diaspora, or so like sometimes that's why I'm like, yeah, mum's opinion matters, like really matters in this view.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, you're right, like making work with them, from them, and a lot of my worldview is shaped by my parents, my cultural heritage, and you know they're tied up in there somehow or another. And I think it's quite interesting because when, like with Nicola, we've spoken about this in a different setting, but when we used to visit cultural institutions, when we went to Liverpool, when we went to Harewood House in Leeds, and my dad would say stuff, it's your ancestors that built this. He's talking about the slave trade and the different institutions that were built from the profits from the slave trade. And he was like, I think they were given such they were so heavily excluded from society when they arrived here and pushed out of and not made not to belong or feel that they didn't have a right to be here. So I think that heavily influenced how they shaped our how we anchored ourselves in the UK. And it was this kind of thing, you're just as good as, nobody's better than you, but you're also not better than anybody else. But at the same time, you've been asked to be twice as good to get half as much, and all this different stuff. But I say that to say that they really tried to anchor our right to access stuff. And so when I'm making work, I want people to feel like they have a right to be there, and that they don't have to justify why they're there or what kind of stake they have in the work. It's open, and they can access it as quickly and as easily as possible.
I think that's so beautiful of like a sentiment to have with the work, because I relate so heavily to what you said when like you went to Hayward House and your dad was just like, no, that's actually ours, because like I feel like, I don't know, as like Caribbean or like maybe like the Black diaspora or whatever, we interpret so much culture and like British material culture or whatever through this lens of like colonialism and imperialism that isn't necessarily like in like the mainstream vein of like our education. And like I have these early memories of and my mum like going to the British Museum and mum just cussing everything off, just says that's bullshit, that think that all of this is just is horrible, and just having this from a very early age of just like this like sense of exclusion from like culture, but also like this kind of trying to like find a foothold or just like some sense of ownership in like the canon of just like British history, but like to this extent like art history, and trying to find like your own cultural identity within like this like whole mess of like identity as to what it is to be like Black, Caribbean, British, because there is so much baggage that comes with that. And like kind of like exploring that is like very interesting, I think. But yeah, that really like ignited all these memories of me going to museum and just being like, I feel like it does remind me of like bell hooks and like the oppositional gaze, and just like coming in there to like learn and observe, but also you're there to add your own thing and like to critique everything you see, because everything is not as it seems, I think.
Yeah, because I think you deal with quite a lot of propaganda, and it's that kind of thing of you don't know that what you believe is propaganda because you've been propagandized sometimes. So it's really hard, it'd be really hard to convince somebody in any country, to be honest, that the things that they've been taught are a very curated or hand cherry-picked narrative. And it was intentional to build a nation and to make you sacrifice for a nation and to feel like you're indebted to a nation. And so we construct these narratives and we digest them because they're easy, and it makes your life easier, and it makes you feel better about yourself and gives you a sense of direction. And I think it's hard to call it a benefit, but I think one of the benefits of not necessarily not sitting fully within and firmly within one nation, whether that's your parents have come from somewhere else or you're living in a nation that's not your mother nation or whatever it is you just get exposure to multiple perspectives, and you grow up knowing that things are not as they seem. Like you said, they're not necessarily as they seem, and there's 2, 3, sometimes 10 sides to each story, and that's your default, as opposed to a very well perpetuated and maintained version of history being your default.
Yeah, that's very true. And that brings us to our next point, which is like, how do you deal with the ownership of our practice? Like, how does that factor into your work?
When you say ownership, like what do you mean exactly?
Did you write this or did I?
You wrote this.
I wrote this. Okay. I'll jump in. Sometimes this is what needs to happen. There are two brains. So we need to check with each other sometimes. But I think when I was thinking about ownership, I was thinking along the lines of like, actually what we were just talking about, which is like museums and galleries and institutions, and when the work kind of moves from living in the studio, if you have a studio, but living in the studio, and to living outside of the studio and living outside of the art agreement, and it has your name, but it doesn't necessarily have you beside it, like holding it. And that kind of like who owns this work and who holds the work and understands the work starts to move out of your control into someone else and into like an institution or a gallery or a private collector, or those kind of spaces. Like how do you personally, like conceptually as an artist, what's your take on it, on that kind of movement?
I suppose it depends what kind of lane of life you're looking at it. So if you're looking at it from an economic perspective and you're saying this person / gallery / archive has bought your work, to date nobody owns my work in that way, which is very interesting, and I don't know if that will change or not. I don't know. If you're looking at it as like a loan, so the physical work moves from my studio to a gallery or a temporary space, and kind of so in some ways inherits or is impacted by that space, I feel okay about that. And I even feel okay about it going into like a controversial space, just because I think if it was just for me, then it would live in my house and that's fine. But because I'm making it for other people, at some point it has to go out there and mingle and mix with other dynamics. Ownership in terms of creative production is an interesting one because I've worked collaboratively, and I'll have an overarching vision. I could do some of the, do the hammering, the nailing, the power tools, whatever it is. Sometimes I don't, sometimes I do. I'll channel other people's creative gifts, whether that's dance or song or whatever, into an overarching thing. And I think that's when it becomes maybe a bit more intangible and difficult to define, because I know that it's not just my creative energy or my like physical energies that have made the work. But like you said, my name will go on the end. And I don't know how to feel about that, to be very honest. I don't know how to feel about it from a historical point of view. If you look at my like immediate and more recent histories, which is like a slave history where all your labor is going to somebody else and all your energies are being accredited to somebody else. It's weird, because then I want to have ownership, but at the same time I don't want to become the thing that oppressed me, and it just gets very messy and difficult to navigate and not very simple, and you just have to treat it on a case by case basis. I hope that made sense. Yeah.
I think it really did, because I think that's what fascinated me by like Return, where I heard you talk about it in the past, and it was really clear that this was like a whole village got together and is making this / has made this. And so I always found that really fascinating, especially when like it wasn't just necessarily your vision and your, like, it sounded like your history and your culture underpinned a lot of it. But then you would also talk about the fact that like I've invited all these other different people, and not necessarily, and I can't remember, but correct me if I'm wrong, quite a few of the people who work on it are people of color, but not necessarily all Black. Like they all have different backgrounds and experiences. And I think that really fascinated me in terms of like the way that, like, because there's the ownership of like it goes to a gallery, but then there's the whole like at the end of the day on like Return, like at the end of it it's going to say Akeelah Bertram, and that's even then like how is that handled, I guess, with your collaborations and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's difficult, because I suppose the handling of that as well depends on timeline. So which timeline are you looking at? And also administration. So if you're looking at it as this is the idea, this is the end point, in 2 years time I want it to be in this many countries, the steps that I need to take along the way, the limitations and like the the ethos, I suppose, will change at each step. Because if we need to get from point A to point B to point C, and point B is a little bit muddy in the definition, but without it, we can't get to point C, where we have, you know, our fucked out ethos, where everything's the way that we like it. It's very interesting, and it's something that I think about a lot. And I'll be honest, like, I'm not sure. I don't know if I always make the correct decision, but I'm quite happy to be right today and to be wrong tomorrow. I'm okay with that. Like, I'll make mistakes. I'm human. And I think that, you know, that kind of, I came to that decision because it goes back to that that experience of being a person of color and being judged more harshly or being stereotyped, and I can't live in the cage of those expectations forever. And so I just have to make a mistake sometimes, and if you make a mistake, you learn from it, you try something different next time. That's a very ambiguous answer, but yeah, sorry, I'm just been extremely like vague and like non-committal, very competition. Like
no, we don't say the P word here.
I want Boris Johnson's job. Like I'm angling for that kind of clarity. Like
These are very like philosophizing. That's no word, but like it's the essence of that, of like very just like like the essence of it, you know.
And like I feel like these are I think these aren't easy questions, first of all. But second of all, I feel like we brought them up because like if you're thinking about like decolonization, like as an artist, you have to think about these things. Like I think there's always going to be that element of like with every gallery show, like every time Tate puts on a show, how many technicians have worked day in and day out to make that happen, and they don't get the light. But that's because they're seen as like there's a hierarchy, and the hierarchy is Tate, and then it's like and then it's the curator, and then it's the artist, and everyone else. Like, and then the buck stops in terms of representation at a certain point. And that's worth thinking about, like, as an artist.
I think so, definitely. Because I think as well, like, even to tie it back into Leeds art education, like I hadn't done history of art before I came to Leeds Uni, and I'll never forget like this very candid, I think it was a lecture on Picasso, and it was like Picasso went to an art market and he saw some African masks, and the narrative, this isn't what they said, but the insinuation was that he leveled up on what these Africans were doing with these masks, and the genius artist came in and completely trailblazed. And you look at what he's done, and you're thinking, this really just lifted the aesthetics of this. But because he's a genius artist, and this is how we view artists, and so, you know, going back to that idea of like, I have a show, my name is on it, but all these technicians and all these people and all this creative energy and technical energy has gone into it. And the accreditation, you know, you watch a film and you see down to the person that held the door open so the smoke for the mist came in is on there, and we don't necessarily have that parity. Not that the film world is perfect, but we don't necessarily have that accreditation parity in the art world. It's difficult and it's confusing, and then at the same time, we're just going to go around in circles here, but then at the same time, it's, yes, I've got a show now, but also for 7 years I've been working random crappy jobs and funding my artwork and funding the research and funding the position that I'm in now. So it becomes very difficult. It's like, you know, yes, I'm getting paid for it, and yes, I'm getting my dues now. But if you were actually to average out that pay, I've been getting paid like £1 an hour for the past like 7 years. If you
nice.
make it economical, if you make it economical, it's it's pretty grueling. So it's very difficult.
I think £1 an hour is about right. Actually, we're probably looking at a deficit right now. Not gonna lie.
Yeah, well, if you make it £1 an hour, it's quite good, because it means you've stopped spending money to make art. So,
that is true. That is true.
Breaking even.
Yeah, finally.
Break even.
So So it is very hard, but you're right, because it does touch on, and I think that over the last year, well, there's a lot of people that have been doing the work to shine a light and to have those conversations, but over the last year, it's become even more acutely obvious, the free labor that funds the art world in different ways. And I think it is really important to, even if you're getting paid and you're now making, it's hard because at the same time, as an individual, you'll have commitments, you'll have people that you need to look after, and you still need to accept money to live, but you still need to be involved in conversations about equitable pay, about all those different things. And yeah, so it's a very circular conversation that should just continue to be had with hopeful, concrete outcomes along the way.
Yeah. Do you remember?
I'm going to do a violent heel turn in our conversation because I'm looking at the time. We have many questions, but we haven't asked them yet. So I'm doing a heel turn on this. I'm going to start talking about university. So, what did you have to relearn as an artist that uni did not prepare?
I had to relearn to trust myself. This is a weird one as well, because again, I went into university, I was 19. I didn't really know myself then. But for 4 years, I was very much entrenched in this ideas of hierarchies of what was valuable, of what was worth looking at, what was worth critiquing, what was worth, how we evaluated and defined an artwork. And I think since leaving education, that's probably been the main thing that I've assessed. Even for a very simple example, like I've always loved and still do really love music videos as an art form, really enjoy them, but whilst at the university, you're not really taken seriously. Similarly, like I grew up in a Black Pentecostal church. I won't get into my own like spiritual and position right now, but automatically within the institution, it's like atheism is the sensible thing, right? Having a faith or a spirituality is kind of stupid. That's the vibe that I got anyway whilst I was at Leeds. And so that discounts a massive part of my experience as a person, and or makes me question the kind of either spirituality or superstitions or world perspectives that I'd accumulated from parents, grandparents, different lineages. And I think just relearning how to make my own judgments from my own experiences, and not being completely suckered into, again, this large narrative that's easy to digest and that tells you what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, what's valuable, what's not valuable. And I think, as I don't want to be too overcritical, because I do think the university can be a place of critical thinking and it can be a place of interrogation, but even within a line of interrogation there can still be a party line that people toe. So I had to relearn how to think for myself based on my experiences.
I really agree with that, because I feel like that is something that I've experienced in the course, and that you went on, that's now changed and I'm doing, and also I'm pretty sure Zipporah has experienced it as well, is that like there is a party line, like, and there's a way or an ideology to thinking that you are taught, like and there's a way to critically analyze that you are taught, like you're giving tools, but the tools are specific. Like it's like these are the specific tools to do this type, but it's not label specific in that respect. Like it's like I feel like vocabulary is like something that I've come up against from my family, is that as I've gone to university, my vocabulary has gone from, I don't know what's my vocabulary and the words I use that I think aren't hard or aren't academic are for them. And it's this like, because I'm currently in university, so my dialogue has changed, my dialect has evolved, and that I think was the biggest like symptom for me, that I was like, oh, okay, the way I think has changed. like something has changed.
The way I write has changed, and you've learned a new language, because even if they think about settings that I'm familiar with, so the church setting, and if the music is on fire and people be clapping, they'll be shouting out, they'll be to give that praise and to give that appreciation. If it sucks, you're going to know about it, but there's a language for that critique. if you go to a sound clash or a dance hall or whatever, and the DJ plays a song and people start banging up the set, they'll start banging up the desk and they'll be like, they'll be saying there's a whole language for critique there, which is gestural, which is very community based and is specific to that group in that arena. And just like similar in the university, there's a language of critique and there's a language for expression that is specific to that arena, which you learn when you go there, and it can then be difficult to move between the different arenas.
Yeah. Definitely. I feel like academic language is so hard to adapt to. I remember like first coming in and like reading something and being like, I'm gonna have to read this at least 10 more times until I get what it means. Yeah, and just adapting to just like the way like people like talk and how you have to then talk like that is very hard. At least for me, I essays, but that's not the point.
It's a good omen for your dissertation.
Yeah. I think it's amazing. It's amazing. Like, I think it's incredible, and there's many beautiful aspects to it. But I think the inherent assumption that it's either better or that you're being more clear. I think your language and vocabulary, don't get me wrong, my dad is a really avid reader, and he's proofread everything I've ever written, because his vocabulary is amazing, and he really just enjoys words. But at the same time, I've lost my train of thought, sorry. That just
it's fine.
Yeah, but at the same time, for everyday language, it's different. I was going to say, just because you can be fooled sometimes and you'll be reading a text, and when you get down to the brass tacks of it, you're like, this doesn't make any damn sense. But it's written in such a way that the thoughts that have been presented are given weight. And when you interrogate them, you're thinking, well, actually, no. But then something that's written in a more simplistic form could be discredited because it doesn't have the same cadence as the other like kind of academic way of presenting things. And I think that's something that you have to learn to navigate and understand, and then also, in order to articulate your own thoughts and have them valued, you have to learn that language and be able to speak it to present your thoughts.
And I'll just jump in and then we'll switch, and then Akeelah will respond and we'll switch. But so there's like a running joke that I feel like runs throughout. I know the fine artists have it. I'm not sure if the history of art people have it as well, but it's this idea that like whenever we have to write about practice, or whenever we have to write about art in general, we basically like, oh, you mean all that art bullshit? And we just like it's speak. Like just art speak, art like, and I feel like my year group calls it bullshit, and we just like and it's like this like colloquialism that we use to describe just talk, like, and kind of the flowery window dressing that that we sometimes use for art. And I mean, I feel like it might be taken a bit harshly on either side, but like, don't get me wrong, words have context in art, and they do have the other side, but I do feel like they do sometimes are used as a way to make something inaccessible to someone else. And I feel like that acknowledgement that, it's bullshit or art speak is this acknowledgement that like sometimes it's used as like a barrier to put in front of an artist and an artwork and the audience that they're trying to reach for.
Yeah, not to defend it. And I think it's, don't get me wrong, it's an incredible skill, but like any industry, you can, like you said, you can have bullshit in any industry, and if you do it well enough, anybody will believe anything. And then it can become quite difficult if you're not familiar with that language. It can become very difficult to know what you're dealing with, basically, and like you said, to access it and understand it.
And to kind of get into the weeds.
Yes. Lost in the sauce.
Exactly. Right. Too academic, and everyone doesn't know what we're talking about.
Yes. But you should pretend that you know. So.
Exactly.
I feel like
I'm just too smart for everybody.
I'm not sure we should be giving away these secrets this question. Like,
I think everybody knows. I think everybody knows. Like, we all know secretly.
Whenever someone looks in the distance talking about tone, they've lost it. They don't know what they're saying. They've gone. It's no longer. Oh, brushwork. Oh, they're gone.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. To that question will be
Complete another heel turn.
just to laugh ourselves out of like our own conversations. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, I think if these fair up. So you also still interact with Leeds Uni. How has your experience as a student to a fellow changed that?
I think it's really interesting. Like I had a conversation with Joanne Crawford just before I started, and she gave me a bit of insight because she'd said that she'd been, I mean, without giving I don't think it was a confidential conversation, but basically just helping me to adjust from being a student and being in that, again, we come back to hierarchies, been in that position, and now being in effectively like more of a teacher kind of level. Oh, sorry, 1 second.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Sorry.
So she kind of like was prepping me, I suppose. Just saying, if you do have a struggle or if you do find any issues with like doing that transition. But I don't know, because I think as a student I kind of just kept my head down and had like a lot of support from people like Pete and Dave, the technicians, and I think I was quite serious, so I just kind of like coasted under the radar, and to becoming doing the fellowship again. That's been quite interesting because it's all been in COVID, it's all been remote. I haven't really been in the school like hanging out. Maybe not anymore, but maybe a year ago I looked quite young, and so I just looked blended in. Like, maybe not now, the stress of COVID, but like so I just kind of blended in, and so I haven't been in the school, and I haven't really been around, and I suppose like I'll find out more about what the difference is in September, hopefully, then we go back and be more in person. But I suppose it's just that I don't want to, without giving too much experience of the tutors. This is my personal experience, but you just realize that everybody's just trying to figure things out. As a student, you're probably thinking that people are all knowing, and it just feels like, they've read so much, they've done so much, they've seen so much, but realistically, it's not that much more. And nobody's an authority, really. Yeah, you could know more than the next person, but no one's an authority, because information is always changing, world experience is always changing, dynamics are always changing. And so I think I just saw it less as a static, you get to this level and you just know everything, and more as a continual kind of process. And especially when I was like doing tutorials with students and thinking, oh my God, like I was there once, and I just felt like there was so much that I had to catch up on. And actually, you don't. You just have to live, and you just have to continue to learn. That's it.
Yeah. I think I've always found that really fascinating, because I feel like as a student, there's like this weird, like I feel like we just have a blanket teacher, like, or lecturer, and we just kind of label everyone with that, so we're not aware of the hierarchy or or who's doing what on the positions. We're just there like, this person is teaching me, and great. And like we kind of just walk away, and like we're only really concerned about who's marking what, and who do I email, like that's kind of like our tunnel vision, like as a student. And I mean, I do think to an extent that like probably, I'm not sure if the school specifically like endorses that, but like I do get the vibe that is happening. There are some teachers who are very much like, I am a teacher, like, and usually the people who insist they be called doctor, that's always fun. Like, like
no shade here, though, guys. You hear it from us. You heard it from somebody else.
Yeah,
I graduated.
Yeah, man, I remember just keep my mouth shut. It's too close to graduation to be shooting myself in the
foot. You haven't got your grades yet. Be careful. Like,
I'll give it my shot.
This is about to have her final show. She's cussing everybody out.
Just burning bridges. Doing so well.
Left and right.
Sorry, we keep doing this. It's pretty late in our workday, so we decided to get delirious. But sorry. But yeah, no, man. Might burn all these bridges and then like doing so well, and the grade just like, unexpectedly, truly.
Carmen, Zipporah, Akeelah, we could actually have a break now and like settle the
We'll try.
Yeah.
So it's 6:05. It's 5 minutes. Does that sound enough? Like enough time to get a cup of tea or whatever?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, great. So if we come back at 10 past, please. 10 past 6. Thank you.
Right, then. No problem. See you in a bit.
Yeah, I think it's all right to crack on. Yeah.
All right, cool.
We're going to do 3 more questions and we can get down to like questions from the audience.
Yeah, and we're gonna focus hard on decolonization as an art practice because I feel like we covered classism, academia, that kind of stuff, and giggles. So we'll like
all the importance are out of the way.
All the importance are done. I'll kind of kick us off. So, thanks for this specific question. I wanted to talk more about like how do you identify decolonization in your practice? So decolonization and your practice, how does that work? And also how you kind of handle the because Return and Unbeloved, they seem to really focus on histories of colonialism, and how do you approach that kind of, I don't want to say loaded, but I feel like complex, thank you. Those kind of complex topics, and especially complex narratives, especially as a POC person and an artist in general. Akeelah, you're unmuted.
Damn it, after 18 months still. Okay, so I'll preface it by saying that I have a very ambiguous relationship / understanding of decolonization, in the sense that I know it appears in my life in different aspects, in different ways, as a cohesive set of tenets. Probably don't have one, but I can definitely pick out how the thought of decolonizing impacts the different stuff that I do. We touched on it already, but I would say probably in the biggest ways is in value systems. So if I'm thinking about decolonization as some kind of reversal, with regards to value systems, I'm thinking about the colonial as the demonization or the devaluation of different traditional practices, of different cultural practices, and worldviews, and the inhabiting of a hierarchy that says, for the most part in the West, that things that are closer to whiteness are good and pure and to be upheld, and things that are closer to blackness are bad and wrong and undesirable. And for me in the present day, it's been about, in a more acute way, it's been about the value systems I inhabit in my work. So I think when I was studying, the trend was for works to be quite clinical and rationalized, and it had to have a lot of theory behind it, and it wasn't really about how it felt. And so me showing up and saying, my cultural experiences and my creative expressions, the vocabulary that I'm aware of, are very emotional, are very much about how it feels, and are coming from traditions, different like diaspora traditions that prioritize those things. I'm going to prioritize those things, and I'm not going to be afraid to prioritize them, because I'm not subscribing to that hierarchy, where those things are at the bottom of the ladder, really. So it's decisions like that where I'm kind of unpacking why I think what I think, and where those value systems are coming from, and saying, does that align with my world experience, and am I right in discrediting, and putting away parts of myself just because they don't, because in this particular hierarchy they're at the bottom, and reversing that value system and saying, no, I will prioritize them, I will include them, and I will use them as a bedrock. So that's one way, and because we've got 3 questions, that's an example. And I think it's effectively that process in whichever field that you're looking at. I to bring in Return, which is an interesting project, which to summarize is about creating connections across the African diaspora, connections across language and cultural hybrids that have happened across in West Africa, in the Caribbean, in North and South America, navigating those hybrids, navigating those new departures in colonial settings, and figuring out what we want our present and our future to look like, and how we extract ourselves from the negative aspects of colonialism, and the positive aspects being the bits that we can't get rid of because we've made hybrid cultures now. You know, specifically for me in the Caribbean, you've got European traditions, African traditions, native traditions, Taino traditions, all blended together. And to take away one is to, you know, where do you start and where do you end? So we stand in that hybridity, but at the same time, we turn away from the value systems that would seek to discredit what we're doing just because of its proximity to Blackness. And I think that's my perspective, and that's what I try to operate from. Don't do it successfully all the time, but I consider it, and I try and integrate it in the internal monologues that I have going on in my head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that brings us to our next question very nicely. Where do you see cloning?
It's really hard to say. Yeah.
It is. It genuinely is. It's like another barrier. It's like you can't say it.
Coloniality in the art world as an artist now.
I think I see it in a lot of ways as a lot of cognitive dissonance where I suppose people have been asked to choose to reject or to re-examine everything that they've ever known as normal or as valuable. Again, it's back to values, and figure out who they are outside of that system. And I think that's very difficult. And I am kind of watching it as a spectator in some respects, because I have a different narrative, I have a different history and heritage that I'm drawing from. And some people are engaging in that re-examination and doing that difficult kind of self-reflection, and some people aren't. And I think every dog has its empire must fall, and that sounds really like dramatic, but nothing lasts forever. Every art center, you know, it changes over every 50 years, every 100 years, and I do think we're moving into a new phase, and it's partly to do with technology, it's partly to do with economics, it's partly to do with a whole host of other things. And I think anything that isn't no longer relevant will automatically become redundant. And so whether it's intentional or whether it's coincidental, I do feel that the colonial overhangs will continue to have less and less relevance and make less and less sense. Even from, like, if you're thinking of nations, the nation is increasingly making less and less sense because of the global connections that we have, because of the internet, because of all these other things, because of economic migration. You know, it's making less and less sense. And I think colonialism will become increasingly irrelevant as a way to think about the world. Hopefully. That's my hope. Might not. That's my 2021 prediction.
Yeah, that's very nice. I hope it goes that way as well. It'll be nice.
I just wanted to ask, so again, that's how like decoloniality is showing up, and I guess I wonder, where do you experience or see the coloniality? So like that, it's inverse, the old structures. Like where do you meet them as an artist?
Interesting. I suppose as an artist, it's mostly met in things like, again, it goes back to hierarchies, and how we organize within a group or a community. For me, coloniality is about having an overlord and then having their direct underlings, and then having this very like pyramid structure in terms of who gets to decide what's what. It's about this distance between the people who are making the decisions and the people who are experiencing the consequences of those decisions. that's a very broad kind of political view if you bring it into the art world. And I do think we are seeing it. You're seeing institutions being more interested in the feedback from people who are experiencing it and making more investment in the engagement that they have with people. And in different ways, you know, they are moving away from that colonial structure. Institutions that are actively seeking to work with people with different perspectives and experiences of the world. You know, it's moving away from that default party line of what it is to express with artistic creation. Yeah, I've forgotten what your original question was.
No, I think
lost in my original thoughts. Yeah.
No, I feel like we definitely touched on it. Like, it was this idea of like, where do we meet coloniality? And I feel like I think ironically, as you were talking, I was like, I'm pretty sure we've already danced around this, even just in this talk of like seeing, kind of pointing like hierarchy, student teacher, like fellow teacher, professor, like, and technician, non-technician. And we've already kind of touched on like these colonialities. And like, I feel like that was beautiful and basically kind of tied a nice bow around like how colonialism is felt like for you as an artist, and I identify with a lot of it, so I think potentially for me, and I guess Nicola and other artists can chip in if they feel like it, but
I feel like, at least for me, like, I don't know, like, colonialism in the art world is a lot of gaslighting. It's a lot of like, yo, you see this, but actually I see that, and what I see is like more legitimate than you because you're like lesser than me. But like that brings us to another violent hill turn in our conversation. And our last question that we will ask of the evening, and that is the art industry, art institutions, all an elaborate line? Let me see your take on this.
Well, I'm gonna play a bit of Russian roulette and not ask you to clarify what this question means. Just
this is Zipporah's question. That is her brain, so I'm gonna let her take
this is a brilliant question. I suppose it depends how you define truth, whether or not it's a lie. I definitely have stood in rooms and thought, this is just hyperbole. This is just like a thought experiment. This is just like, what is this? It's a bit like the King's new clothes. Like, you know, everybody's saying, oh, he looks really great. And so you come in and you're like, okay, this must be great. Sometimes with an institution. Sometimes it is very much like, I don't know, like, I suppose the Cold War really did a number on the world when it comes to propaganda. And for example, you go into the Tate and it's this huge building. It's so heavy with presence that you automatically ascribe value to it. And anything that they say then must be true. Because how could you amass this much resource? How could you amass this much presence and not have something to say and not have credibility? So if you're thinking of it in that sense, then yeah, it could be a massive lie. You could literally say anything and people would believe you. I don't think that's true of every institution. I think there's some really incredible organizations. A lot are from grassroots kind of perspectives or origins. Some are more established and they've just happened to have had a really good change of personnel and they have a different vision for what and how art operates. I think it really depends on the objectives of the institution. But overall, I think sometimes I do think art is a bit of a scam. I'm not sure why. It's just a feeling. It's like, you know, you're listening to a salesman and you're like, this sounds great, but I'm not sure why. I just don't, something doesn't seem right. And to an extent, it is because it's all about imagination. It's all about theorizing. Nothing is really real in art in the sense that, you know, you're gonna make it to the moon or you're going to do something, you know, very concrete and tangible and measurable. Nothing is real in that sense. So if that's what you're saying, then yes, it is a lie. And I participate in it frequently. So like,
we all do. We're all sing and participating in this life together, and that's what it's all about at the end of the day. So,
but it doesn't mean it's not valuable. That's the other
exactly.
thing.
Akeelah just saves all of our words.
Doesn't mean it's not valuable. Like, thought experiment is important.
I feel like that is, I think there's this like weird double-edged thing. Like, it's kind of, we all know what's behind the curtains. Like, and I feel like my wonderful man Rocco is like the biggest example of like, my mum will take one look at it and be like, why? Like, what is this? Why? And I feel like that moment is when it starts to straddle the elaborate lie / really introspective look at color theory and surrealism, and it's like it's a box. Like that, it's like I feel like the lie kind of, the lioness of it is situational sometimes, or it's very apparent when you walk in and it's like, oh, okay, this is why I'm here. Like,
I remember reading Greenberg, like, and we were doing a module on abstract expressionism, and we're studying Greenberg. And I remember being like, this guy's high. This guy is high. Like, this guy is really just on one right now. But it's been a very serious thing. And it's like, and me trying to really get into what he was saying and find reason in it, and find, I just didn't, it just wasn't for me. And not everything is for everybody. That's fine. So, you know, if you're not smoking the same stuff, then of course it's a lie to you. But if you're in there hot boxing with everybody else, then yes, it's
such a great
real.
mouthful. It's such a great mouthful. I'm taking that with me from my whole life now. It's great.
Yeah. So you're either in the room or you're not, and that's okay. That's okay. Yeah.
It is so. And Greenberg is an art critic, for those who don't know. And he famously talks about abstract expressionism, which is just anything that's looked weird, probably abstract art.
Yeah, it's like anything that's about nothing is abstract expressionism. So I
subtitles.
Anything that needs subtitles is abstract.
I feel like we're gonna get a lot of hate mail after this from like some hard.
I mean, you can give it to. I will scream on the hill how much I hate abstract expressionism. I'm not gonna lie, I hate it so much. I
enjoy it, but I just don't buy all of the narratives. Like, sometimes you can just enjoy things and you don't need to. That's again, personal opinions being perpetuated here. Very
personal opinions that you cannot fail us for. This is the important thing that we need to keep reiterating. These are opinions that we cannot be prosecuted for in any way.
Exactly.
But you should be careful. I have my degree, so be careful.
I feel like it's a good point to open up to questions now that we've kind of given our 2 cents on the elaborate lie of the art institution. So if anyone has any they want to jump in, please do. Or even just unmute yourself. We're always welcome to have a nice chat with people.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Laura. Laura.
Oh, thank you.
Nice.
Oh, thank you. Abstract, but no straight lines either.
Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. If not,
is anyone gonna have any questions? Do you want to beef us about my opinions about abstract expressions?
I think I've got some.
Hi. Hi. I've got quite a lot of questions actually, but I'm really interested in this idea of decolonialization of the arts kind of curriculum. I'm a fine art graduate, but from many decades ago. But I just like first thoughts about how you do it. You know, it's a bit like getting eggs out of an omelette, surely. And I'm really, I really subscribe to the idea that it needs to be done. And Akeelah, you said earlier about like Picasso, and the kind of, there's the demoiselle, the appropriation of like African imagery in French art in the early 20th century. So I've got two kind of questions really, two themes. How do we start to make the arts curriculum better? And I have to say that I think it is a fraud, and I think it's a fraud within kind of white English culture. Before we talk about the whole globe, and then maybe we could talk about the idea of jurisdiction. Who gets to make art about what? And when should they be kind of disallowed from doing so? So two quite vague questions, but there you go.
Yeah. I agree with you with the omelette analogy. And you know, I can be quite extreme in my vision, my rationalization sometimes, and sometimes I might just raise it to the ground, start again.
I think that
Other times it's sometimes if you're looking at it happening incrementally, it is very much about having those varying perspectives on the same level playing field and with the same level of contribution. And you know, it's things that are as simple as wondering why Kehinde Wiley is an African American artist and you know, Jackson Pollock is an artist. It's just like it's all those kinds of labelings and siphonings off of creativity that we filter through these very like colonial and very Western prioritizing ways of thinking about the world.
It's a very difficult thing, isn't it? Because the whole edifice of contemporary art is based on kind of a Eurocentric model or American model, you know. So that, it's very, very difficult. But how do we? I mean, obviously, this event in itself is going some way to, you know, raising a debate about making an arts curriculum which is more inclusive and more progressive. But again, you know, what are the other moves? What do we do?
I think I can kind of like jump in there, but I think it comes back to what Akeelah was talking about with the unlearning, like that difficult cognitive dissonance phase. I feel like is how a lot of my experience with decolonization has begun. Has been a lot of the unlearning and learning and like kind of managing. And unfortunately, I feel like that's the method that or the standard method. And I think we're developing new ones, hopefully, as we talk about it and as we fine tweak and find our own kind of like decolonialities within our own practices and with our own academic practices as well, and not just within our artistic ones. And even just our ethos in life. Like I think that's what I got from Akeelah, and also I feel like one that I feel like underpins much of the decoloniality I've seen enacted is this like unlearning and relearning over and over and over again.
I think that I thought it's a lot of essence of it, because like when you're trying to decolonize from inside institutions, this is like the main method in which you need to do it is to like really take, because like when you're decolonizing inside the institute, the things that have been learned that shouldn't have been learned have already been learned. So it's very important to backtrack and be like, no, that's not correct. That's not the way it is. But like I've always been very adamant in my opinions about how like institution is what it is, and you can't decolonize it really from the inside and have like the change that you want. Like you need to be outside of it and you need to raise it like from the ground and destroy it. It goes back to like what I was saying about like it's all about an elaborate lie. Like is education an elaborate lie? Like is academia an actual elaborate lie in itself of just like how it props itself up? Like who have told us the things we're learning are the epitome of what it is? Like why do we pay so much for what we are doing when we don't see the fruits of it, especially when we are Black students? I like feeling supported in the fact that we are Black students and acknowledge and such and such and such. And it's just like, as I said, like this institutional academic gaslighting I experienced as a student, as a Black student, is very apparent to me. And why I think both me and by this project was that like cognitive dissonance of thinking these things, but like the mainstream authority being very much against our emotions and our experiences and like what we think is right and what a lot of people think is right, but like isn't the case. But yeah.
I think you touched on it a bit, Zipporah, with you know, is education a lie? And I think in a lot of ways we've inherited a lot of structures and institutions that were inherently born out of a specific point of time with specific economic and cultural aims. And our aims and economic and cultural have changed, but we're still using the systems and the structures that were born of that era. So even I think something again that like moving into the information age from the industrial era being about mass production, and that's the mass production of objects and the mass production of ideas, and having this quite uniform top-down way of doing things. We're still operating in education in that way to a certain extent. And is it about this information age? You know, kid that came in here tells me all about this random stuff that he's learned on YouTube. And it's just like, where are you getting this from? But, you know, it's the diversity in thought that can occur because they're using a different structure to disseminate information. And I wonder again how long it will take to move towards that model and towards those structures, and is that where the decolonization occurs, because it's operating from a technology and from an infrastructure that's just completely outside of the era with those different aims. So,
Thank you so much for those questions. I feel like they really like drove us to clarify some of the points and like the positions that like we've been kind of talking about, and you know, just expanding the knowledge like that we have. But and I think just wanted to come back in that like I think we mentioned in a couple of talks, but like me and Zipporah, and I'm sure me and Akeelah and me and Nicola, like every person I met with decolonization has these personal approaches and their own personal ethos and value systems that they use to judge it. And I think the only thing that unites those is this is wrong and this needs to change. And like, and I think Griselda provided a really good, her talk provided like a really good standpoint of like academically how it's done. And I think in art practice, this is like another, if we can present like another view of it, and like, and I think that's what this program's been trying to do, is like all these different views and how do you change in that way.
I must say, sorry.
No, I was going to say, like the art world and art education is very responsive, and it's very good at kind of at 1 minute being shocked by iconoclastic practice, and then absorbing it and going, this is now orthodox. Do you know what I mean? And it's very difficult. But again, can I push you on the idea of jurisdiction? I'm not sure if it's totally related to the theme of this talk, and I don't want to stop anyone else if anyone else has got questions, but I'm personally invested in this. I'm in the middle of writing something about this issue, and you know, so for an example, I mean, I don't know if you know the work of Dana Schultz, who's a white Jewish artist in New York, but some years ago, probably I can't remember, was it maybe 5 or 8 years ago, she painted a painting called The Open Casket of, I'm going to forget his name now, which is really awful, and you know about that issue then, you know about the fact that there was some kickback on that, and I wonder within this whole debate about the kind of Emperor's New Clothing about contemporary art, whether people are young artists, emerging artists that are struggling to find their voice, are kind of taxed or vexed by this idea of like jurisdiction. You talked again, to go back about Picasso, you know, did he have a right to kind of airlift imagery from art from the African continent into European art at the time in 1907 or whatever it was, and where are we now on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I think we've massively, also with social media, kind of cancel culture, and it's been quite easy to put up fences. I don't have a hard and fast rule for that, but I do think it's the kind of thing, if you're going to embed yourself in a conversation that didn't necessarily apply or have you in mind as a target audience in the first place, I think how you embed yourself is always something that you should consider. So going to, like, I don't know the ins and outs of the Dana Schultz story, but I've come across it in some of the students' work I've looked at this last year, and you know, Black Lives Matter being a very pertinent and like forefront issue, and people wanting to express something about that. But if you're going to enter a conversation, really considering who am I talking over, and who has maybe more to offer than me within this conversation, and where do I fit within this conversation, have to be questions that we all ask, really. When it comes to jurisdiction, you know, like, and it is about value systems, and we all have to consider our individual privileges and perspectives and stuff like that, and think about how they operate in any conversation that we enter, really. And I think there'll never be a consensus about whether that's right or wrong, but if you choose to enter a conversation, you should be willing to discuss why you're talking in it and how you're talking in it, and receive people's feedback about your presence there. Is a very generic way that I'm going to answer that.
No, I really agree with it, and I think it's a very valid point of view. Like along Black Lives Matter, Edward Colston statue coming down came to mind. Edward Colston statue went down in Birmingham, Bristol, yes, Bristol. Last year, and when it was brought down, another artist came in and installed a statue of a Black woman, a supposed protester, immediately, and he was told by the council, don't do it. No one wanted him to do it, but he installed it. And this is why artists who came in and just parachuted the work in and then had to take it down, it was up for less than a week. And it was that moment where, like, it missed the mark. Like it widely missed the mark, and because it was this understanding that, like, that wasn't his job, that wasn't his space, that wasn't his moment, and it sounded and felt a lot like a cash. And I mean, there are some people, and it's a debate. Again, people are split on whether what he did is right or what he did is wrong. But I feel like I agree with Akeelah. It is this, when you enter that conversation, I would just add, not only do you have to be ready to be discussed, but you have to be prepared. Like, you have to know where you're stepping into. There's no use stepping in blind in that respect. And I feel like that's when the cultural appreciation, cultural appropriation comes in, is when you airlift out without that context, without that history, without that knowledge. And not that you should be airlifting them in any space, but there's this needs to be this acknowledgement and respect, I think. And that's where the value system that Akeelah comes in. You could kind of tie those 2 points together. Is there is this respect that we have to have, and I think that's where the jurisdiction comes in. It's like, sometimes I'm a mixed artist, so, and I'm multicultural, and one of my cultures is Nigerian. I've done name fabrics before, but I have this understanding these aren't mine, and like, whereas, so I don't feel comfortable appropriating them, I don't work from them, I respect, you know. I feel comfortable disrespecting my cultural artifacts because they're mine to disrespect, but someone else's, they're not mine to disrespect. I don't have that right. And it's that acknowledgement of my lane, almost, or my where my privileges end and where someone else starts, that kind of thing.
I think it's like, why, if you're entering, the question also has to be why you're showing up now. Because even to use that specific Jane Elliott, who has spent her life working around mental health, if she was to erect a statue, I think there'd be a slightly different, because she's not entering the conversation, she's been in the conversation. There'd be maybe a different response to that. But like you said, if it appears opportunistic, and anybody can listen to a conversation at any point, pick it up anytime they want, but to be embedded in the conversation already, or to be active in it previously, and then to just kind of show up and, you know, take advantage almost of it's a very different things, like you said.
Cool, that's very good. I'm going to stand down now, and can I just thank you for the clarity and just like right thinking that I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
For the questions.
I know we're pushing on time, so Caesar, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. Honestly, maybe I should look at my emails more often, because I got the email today and I was like, there's something. And I didn't realize how tired I was until I came here. Not like tired physically, but maybe just like emotionally, in the sense like this is the most like non-white people I'd been in a space with. And I started, and and like, it's true. And I think Zipporah, you said something about more of the sense of just like throwing it all away in terms of decolonisation. And while I'm a cultural studies student, so I felt very much supported in my experiences in terms of writing about racism, because that's all I do, and to be honest, that's all I have to write about. So so that's what I write about. But I know there's other peers of mine in other departments who have written things, about race, and they felt like it's come off as too black and they've been penalised for that. That's not been my experience. But at the same time, I'm really aware of the fact that while my professors are super, super supportive, I'm very aware that I'm writing about black experiences for like almost like a white gaze. And I kind of find that sort of really difficult to navigate. And not only that, but it's kind of like, so I come from an area, the schools were just really tragic, so that's a common experience of many young black people. But then coming to university and then getting a seat at the table, quotation marks, and I'm realizing that like this is no shade to anyone, but a lot of the table is very mediocre, yet you have to be like even better to have opportunities. So I'm just really and my experience has been very privileged, don't get me wrong. I've gotten so much more opportunities than most people would get, mainly because I'm chatty, I speak in lectures, I'm very passionate, I go and search and engage. But I'm just wondering, like, because you're Carmen and Zipporah, if I'm right, you're finishing now, how have you navigated this? And I mean, I feel like I'm okay, quotation marks, but I'm really concerned about creating places for like belonging for other people who, minority people who aren't like me, who aren't chatty, who aren't willing to go there. So I don't know, how can we create spaces of belonging, I suppose, for other people, knowing sort of like we have no choice but to sort of like navigate and exist within this space.
Yeah. Do you have something off the top of your head, or do you want me to?
I do have some. I just remember just like navigating it. It was very hard for me coming here because I come from London. I'm also from London. It's just like it's such an experience. So I really was just in all these like very black educational spaces. Going from there to just like the North, which though like I was like I think in my like in history of art, like I think there only one of a black student in the course, and I was just like, wow. But very like a very worried one, just like, oh my god. But yeah, I think it's really about community. I think because like everyone I met Carmen, it was like really much the antithesis, like the genesis of our like friendship was that we saw each other across the hall and was like, oh my gosh, there's another black person. Oh my gosh, I found someone else. It was very much that. It was just seeing like a unicorn in the wild and being like, is this real? I feel like it's not, but I'm gonna go over there anyway, just in case. And it's just like, I think it really is just like finding that community and like finding your people and like really like just having like this like spaces where you can talk about your experiences and just places where like you can talk and people will listen to you and they will listen to you properly and they will have the same experiences as you and you're just like, well, I'm not alone in all of this, and like it doesn't feel as hard when you have other people who are shouldering the same burden as you. And I know like when like I went to the Black Femme Society, like that burden really lifted a lot off my shoulders because I found with other Black people, like do like basically like finding the same bullshit was happening to them, and I was just like, okay, it's shit, but at least we've got each other in this. At least you can talk to each other about all of this racist bullshit, and at least we can just like hug each other, tell each other it's gonna be all right, and we can make it through and get our degree at the end of the day, and that's what it's all about. But like that was how I found navigating it, and that's how I found it to be bearable, was I had other people who were doing it with me, and we were like sharing it together.
Yeah, I agree completely, and I think, I mean, Nicola always at the beginning, she talks about complaints collectives, and I feel like that's it. Like, you kind of need to ground. I grounded myself in my community, which was people like Zipporah and other people my age who shared my identities, not just Black, also queer, also artists, like the allies around me. And like, I have definitely sieved out quite a few people from my friend circle, and you know, I've gotten to this point where I have this network that supports me and is my ground rock, and I feel like that is the biggest tool ever. And to have that network, and to have those people, and to have those artists as well, artists and other people in your field are key as well, to making those connections. And often, honestly, within the POC world, like, if they get to see another POC face, they're so generous with their time and with their connections, because they want to do what Zipporah did. They want to lean on each other. They want to grow the family, grow the network. So that's the biggest thing. But I would also say, me and Zipporah, I think we agree on these things and we talk about them. But from that point of security and network, it's really easy to ground yourself then in the history of POC people in the spaces that you're in. Like, I found learning about Labaina Hamid's practice, and learning about Ingrid Pollard and Sutta Biswa and all those other artists came before me, and using them as like this, oh, I'm not alone, and I've never been alone. And that understanding is like the best possible like moment to kind of arm yourself intellectually. And so you have the intellectual resources and the communal resources to kind of be like, okay, cool, I'm happy now. And like, I'm not saying that this is like the be all end all, but that was my toolkit that I made myself in that respect. And I feel like as long as you kind of ground yourself in the collective, I feel like everyone feels more secure. You have to kind of make your own belonging, but once you get one collective point, you eventually end up in the network, and that's where the security lies, as far as I know. Akeelah, did you have anything that you did?
Yeah, like you said, join a secret society. Like, follow the clues and get inside. But
yeah,
I think I think in terms of like outside of Black spaces, and even to bring it back to your first question, amongst Black people, I'm not Black, I'm Akeelah, and it's amongst non-Black people that I am Black. When I go to Ghana, when I go to Ethiopia, I'm not Black. When I'm in the Caribbean, I'm not Black. I'm just Akeelah. And I think that's maybe one of the most important distinctions to recognize if you're not a Black person or a person of color, is the very sharp awareness of how you show up and how you're perceived wherever you go when you're in a majority white space. The most comfortable spaces I've been in as working as an artist is when white people have taken on the labor of my Blackness, and by that I mean they have pointed out things so I don't have to. They have challenged things so I don't have to, whether that's my mistreatment or a microaggression or whatever it is. And they have taken on some of that burden because they've built an awareness and they're acting on that awareness. And where I've been just able to just show up, and I'll be very honest, like I have growing up in England and having massive like microaggressions since you're 3, you build a face that you take out to the world to protect yourself. And with your family and with friends, it's different. But going out, because you know that at any moment you can be stereotyped or you can receive a microaggression. So you're like you said, Caesar, you're trying to be twice as good, you're trying to be twice as polite, you're trying to be twice as palatable to minimize anything that might happen to you. And so when you're able to show up to an art space, a majority white space, and people are looking at you as an individual, and they're looking at you as an individual personality and set of characteristics, you're able to relax a little bit more. And when they have made the effort to learn the language and to get an understanding of what your experience might be, you're able to relax a little bit more. And I think that's also important. Balancing it, of course, like Carmen and Zipporah were saying, it's amazing just to be able to relax within a community of people who are having a similar experience as you. But you have to go out at some point and, you know, interact and make networks. And I think it's really important that a lot of work has begun, and a lot of people are like doing that work to learn more, so that when you show up as a Black person or a person of color, you know, some of the load is taken off, and you can just kind of be yourself and not have to perform a face in order to get by. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, that was really great. Thank you so much.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much as well. And if anyone else has anything. Ooh, Chris.
Yeah, hi. Hello. I really don't want to like make you guys stay for any like longer or like okay, but I just want to say like thank you so much for talking so candidly about your experiences and so like personally about those. And something that I'm really interested in is kind of like the meta narratives and mythologies that we create when like talking about art and creating art. So like I'm a fine art student, and I guess the kind of experience I've had in a lot of crits, and especially crits this year now that they've been online, is that like, you know, some people kind of make art about like nice colors and nice shapes, like very aesthetic things. That's like cool. And then some people make art about like very deep-seated traumas that is like a literal part of their soul, or even if it's not necessarily explicitly about that, it's like they're still making art from the kind of network of oppressions that they face. And a lot of the times is that because both instances of those arts are like kind of presented on like the same kind of level on the same kind of page, and so often, especially if it's like a kind of bad crit, so if it's at like 9 a.m. on a Monday and everyone just wants to go make some toast, they're just kind of like, yeah, wow. So like there's that real like sterility and kind of like dryness of reactions. And so my question to you guys, or like if you kind of want to talk about it, is how do we kind of switch or like make that sterility into like a more fertile environment? How do we allow, you know, especially students to kind of like nurture those traumas and oppressions in the art that they face, and kind of not just like sweep it under the rug, or just kind of, you know, canonize it in like, oh yeah, you're a student, you make art.
That's such a wonderful observation, Chris, and nice to see you as well. Really, really well summarized and surmised.
Thank you.
I'm not saying it's starting an answer, by the way, guys. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I haven't done art critique in years, honestly. So Carmen, you must answer.
I'll go. I got an opinion on this. I'll do it. But I always have the viewpoint of crits have to be done a certain way, and I feel like if a crit is between its peers, and it is my peers talking to me, and it's not academic, that's when a crit is useful. And that's when it can hold the trauma. I've experienced that. This is my experience, is when it's me and my friends, and my friend comes to me, and this is about this moment where I'll use the example of one of my friends on the course. She's doing work about like sexual harassment in clubbing environments. And when she came with that energy to the crit, no one knew how to handle it. And it was a male teacher who was leading it, so he didn't know what she was talking about. And then when she was doing a crit with me and with a couple of my friends, it was an impromptu one in the studio, we were talking. The difference was we held that with her, and then we were able to assume the trauma together, and we were able to be like, you don't have to give us all of you, because we can give as well. And we can hold that together, and we can be like, okay. And the truth of the matter is, I've had some of my white friends hold that with me as well. And so it's not about experience of the trauma. It's about the ability to hold it and to be like, that, I don't need you to explain to me and do that labor. That is not necessary. I'm just going to accept what you've given me, and I'm going to work with it. And I think that when I've had crits where that is the assumption, then you can hold red is an awesome color, and this is this painting, and then you can hold men are horrible to women, and like some men use cis men use the club environment as a predatory space. And as a woman, you're there to have fun, but also you have to be on your guard, and you can hold those two things when the men in the room are willing to hold that, cis men are willing to hold that with you, and cis women and anyone in that room is willing to be like, I will hold that reality and I won't question that reality, and we will work with that reality. And also, red is a great color. Like that's the balancing act that has to be done, but it's done collectively and it's done as a group. And unfortunately, I've also been a crit where everyone else is willing to do the work, and there's like two people who are there like, no. And when that happens, that's when it's like okay, we need to reassess and we need to take it back, and we need to find, and we need to like, but all of this work is unspoken. Like it's all unspoken and it's all assumed, as far as I know. It's all about, as I've experienced, it's more just reading relationships and reading the room and holding it together. But then I've also done that with strangers. So it's about the people and where they're willing to meet you in that respect. But yeah, I hope I answered that. Like,
no, that was great. Yeah, you definitely spoke to that kind of need to actually talk about that. Like everyone kind of talks about art in very academic contexts and about like the histories of art, but like again, like these kind of meta narratives of making art and like even just our emotional kind of energetic processes towards that. It's just so important to recognize.
Yeah, we're still people.
Yeah, and if you've pulled something out of the depths of your soul, you probably don't want to spend the next half hour defending it and arguing its validity. Yeah.
Would you mind too much if I made a short comment about this?
Go for it.
Is that okay? I think a big elephant in the room on Chris's question is the fact that, you know, I've spent 30 years in education, and every high school teacher in this country has had so many training hours about how to be a teacher, and yet everyone who teaches on a fine art graduate level course, which is 2 steps above being a GCSE student, has had 0 hours about how to interact with students, how to coach them, be sensitive to the kind of traumas they might be trying to process through their artistic expression. And I think that's a real big point, you know. These people are oftentimes just counting the hours until they can go and use the dark rooms or the printing presses in universities, rather than having their students' holistic, pastoral and expressive lives supported, you know. So they're clumsy. They might be great artists in their own rights, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're qualified to teach people how to be an artist, you know.
I think it goes back to that student-teacher relationship hierarchy that you spoke about earlier, where you just kind of assume that they know everything, and that, you know, and they maybe act in that assumption or feel like they have to perpetuate that assumption. And instead of saying, gosh, I've got no idea, I don't know anything about that experience, and so I'm not sure how to feed back, something has to be said, and you have to have the answer, and as a result you say something inappropriate, or you say something unhelpful, or you say something quite destructive, rather than just saying nothing and saying, let's find out together. Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes we forget that I think the arts work best when it's a community, and I think we work best as collectives rather than individual like geniuses, as fun as that is in capitalism. I feel like artists work better as people in a group, and that's just what we need to focus on, really.
I feel like that's a really gorgeous place to end, because we have gone slightly over time, so we should let everyone go and have their dinner. It's been so fantastic. Thank you so much, Akeelah, Carmen and Zipporah. It's been totally lush. Thank you. I've got a lot out of it, and I've really enjoyed being here with you all. I'm going to be a bit of a tease and say this may or may not be the last Buyers Remorse talk. So you'll just have to keep your eyes peeled on the socials. Yeah, so sorry to be a tease. But I just want to give thanks, and yeah, thank you so much. And And I hope everyone has a nice evening. There's still some sunshine outside where I am, so I could go into the light.
And thank you very much for having me. Thank you for your wonderful conversation and your questions as well. And thank you everybody for listening and staying to the end. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so much. And please be free and do wonderful things. Exactly.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.